Okay, so and today we are going to look at manipulation of formula. So essentially that's writing one thing in terms of another. Okay, so in the question here we're asked to write the expression below in terms of variable in square brackets. So in this expression or this that we're given, we're told c is equal to the square root of a squared plus b squared, and we want to write that in terms of a. Always with manipulation of formula, essentially all we have to remember is BIMDAS. Okay, so we look and see first, well, what are the first things? Have we got anything in brackets that we need to deal with? No. Have we got anything indices? We don't really, but a square root is kind of like an indice because we know, or an index, we know that a square root is the same as something raised to the power of a half. Now, the easiest thing that we can do to get rid of a square root sign is that we would square both sides. So that's what we're going to do here. I'm going to say, to get rid of that square root, I'm going to square this side. And if I square one side, I have to do the other. So always, if we have a square root, all we have to do, we remember, we square both sides. Okay, and so when I have squared both sides, well, I know that here c to be squared, well, that's just c squared. Here I can see my square root sign and the square, so they're going to cancel each other out. So that cancels with that. So I'm left with c squared is equal to a squared plus b squared. Now again, I need to look and see, well, what do I want on its own? I'm asked to get it in terms of a, so I want a on its own. So very simply, I'm going to say, well, here is minus b squared. If I subtract b squared on that side, of course, I have to do it on this side here. So again, following through on that, well, my b squared minus b squared is going to cancel here. And I'm going to be left down here with c squared minus b squared is equal to a squared. Again, I want a on its own. So, well, to just get a, when I've got a squared, what am I going to do? I'm going to have to get the square root of a squared, which will give me a. And so the square root here of a squared, and if I get the square root of that side, I must get the square root of this side. Okay, so I know then straight away, well, that and the square sign, that's going to cancel, which will just leave me with a here. And then I'm going to have that a is equal to the square root of c squared minus b squared. Again, just for tidiness sake and because I'm used to it, I will just flip those around. So like a mirror, swap sides. And so I'm going to say, well, a is equal to the square root of c squared minus b squared. And just note there, I haven't changed the order of anything. It's still c squared minus b squared, and it's still under the square root sign. All I've done is just swap each sign around. So that's our answer to that one. Okay, we'll just do we'll do two more examples. Okay, so here I'm going to begin in the exact same method as before. I'm going to square both sides. Okay, so that's going to cause me to say, well, here, if the original said or is equal to the square root of pq plus q, well, then to get rid of that square root sign, I'm going to square this side, which means I have to square that side. Okay, so that square of the right hand side gets rid of the square root, also gets rid of these cancel. So here I'm going to be left with, on my next line, or squared is equal to pq plus q. Now I'm asked to get q on its own here, so I want to factorize the right hand side to get q on its own. So if I take q outside the bracket here, so I'm just going to still have or squared is equal to, so here I'm going to take q out, so I'm just going to underline q and q here. So what would go inside the bracket? Well, first of all, I'd be left with p, and q into q goes once, and I have my plus sign in between. So that's the next step. Okay, and again, progressing on now, in order to get q on its own, well, I would need to divide this side by p plus 1, so I can cancel that down. So if I do that on the right hand side, I need to do it on the other side. Okay, so now I can see, well, the p plus 1s, they cancel. And so I'm going to be left with r squared over p plus 1 is equal to q. And again, just for neatness sake, I will say, well, that's q is equal to r squared over p plus 1. And again, I'll just put a box around it to show that I have finished the question. Okay, and we'll do one final example. Okay, so here we've a little bit of a longer one. Again, we're asked to rewrite this expression in terms of the letter in square brackets. So that's, this time it's to rewrite the square root of p over r minus q equal to p in terms of r. So again, we're just going to remind ourselves of BIMDAS. So rewriting that down here, I have so p over r minus q, it's all under square root sign, is equal to p. Well, the first thing I need to do is to square both sides. So I'm going to square this side, which means equally I'm going to square that side. Now this square root and that square, they cancel. So the first bit that I have here is that p over r minus q is equal to p squared. Now, I want to get rid of my fraction on the left-hand side. So the easiest thing for me to do would be multiply the top here by r minus q. Again, if I do that at this side, I must do it over here. So I'm going to multiply by r minus q. Now I know that r minus q and that is going to cancel from simplifying fractions. And so I'm going to be left with p on the left-hand side is equal to p squared r minus q. And I'm just going to expand out those brackets for my own sake. And so expanding out that bracket, I know p squared is going to be multiplied by r, and it's also going to be multiplied by q. So on my next line, I would have p is equal to p squared r minus p squared q. Again, I'm looking to get r on its own. So the first thing that I want to get rid of from the right hand side is this minus p squared q. So here I'll say plus p squared q. If I do that over here, I also need to do it on this side. Okay. Okay, and just to give me a bit more space to continue, I'm just going to draw a line down here. So tidying that up, well, minus p squared q plus p squared q, they cancel. So here on the left hand side, I'm left with p plus p squared q is equal to p squared r. And again, in order to get r on its own, well, on this side I want to divide by p squared. If I divide by p squared there, I have to divide here by p squared, and I have to divide here by p squared. These two cancel. P divided by p squared, well, that's going to give me 1 over p. Here I have p squared q divided by p squared. The p squareds cancel, so I'm left with plus q is equal to r. And there we have it, all in terms of r. So I just want to flip that around again so that I have r on the left hand side. So r is equal to 1 over p plus q, and that's our answer. Okay, so open up Schoology and you will get your learning check.